What I plan to do today is to talk about the conscience, justice, and the law. Okay. Now, what I like about leadership, and I told some of your friends that visited my office yesterday. Now, those of us that grew up with grandmothers in the villages, they'll tell you, don't go into the bushes without your shoes, wear your socks. You can't go into the bush at night. Right? That was very scary. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that. That was the jungle then. There are some places in the internet you can't go to, stay away from porn sites. The same caution. Now the jungle has become digital, right? The story is still the same. Well, let me tell you that this course you are taking is preparation for the next jungle, which is the corporate world. Now, the difference between that village life and the digital life is that I had a grandparent, my kids have me. In the corporate world, you're on your own. You're going to play in an environment that you need to learn the rules as you go. It's like flying the jet while fixing the engine. So the story that we're going to use today to illustrate this point is a young 17-year-old ran away from home. And how many of you read the story? Did you read the synopsis for this class? Billy Bad. So Billy runs away from home. He was 17 years old and finds himself on a Navy ship at sea. And it was wartime. He was one of these cabin boys running around. You send them, they run from one cabin to the other. No education, young, naive. Now, nobody will ever forgive you in the corporate world for being naive. What did I say? So when you go to bed tonight, repeat it 3 times before you sleep. Being naive is not an excuse. But here was Billy. He comes on board. He's chatting with everybody. But there are technically 3 groups of people on that ship. The low-end guys who did the brunt of the work every day. Then there's a master sergeant who is like the slave master, cracks the whip. And then there is Captain Veer, who is the overall captain of the ship, the most powerful person on that ship. And as you hear this story, think about that ship as the corporate world. Think about that ship as the new jungle, that you are Billy. And you are there and you are naive. And so one day, as he was on one of his errands, Claggart called him and said, "Hey, Billy, come over here. You are the new kid that just came on this ship, right?" He said, "Yes, sir." "How is it going so far?" He says, "It's okay. It's an amazing place. I love it." He said, "Wow." So he brings Billy to the bow of the ship and said, "Can you see the surface of this sea? Look outside." So he saw nothing but blue sea, right? Nice wavy. As you get further into the sea, it's really calm. You don't see all the tides you see when you're standing on the shore. So he said, "Billy, do you see how calm the surface of this sea is?" He said, "Yes. Yes, sir." He said, "Underneath this calm are gliding monsters. Only the sharpest teeth survives." What do you think that means? You're 17-year-old, you are naive. An adult says, "See how calm the surface is? Don't be fooled. If you go a little further down, there will be sharks, there will be eels, there will be everything there. And the toughest one, the one that has the sharp most teeth, is the one that will survive in that jungle." What does Billy know to do with that information? So he runs off on his errand. And then he said, "You see all those guys you work with? They are very dangerous people. Be careful." Billy is like, "Whatever." He says, "Sir, they speak very highly of you. They loved you. You don't realize that? And he said, Billy, they don't love me. They just tolerate me. He said, every day when I walk through this ship at night, through the dark corridors of this ship, I'm prepared for one of them sticking a knife in my back. So don't be fooled. Don't be naive. So Billy left. Things are fine. One day, this bad guy goes to the captain. He says, Captain, last night, when I was going on my usual walks to make sure everything was okay on this ship, I had a conversation that was quite disturbing. And it was the voice of Billy, the small boy, the 17-year-old kid among the grown-ups. He was inciting them to mutiny. Isn't that profound? Say, Billy has done nothing to this guy. Billy says, we love you. You are such a great guy. You are a great leader. Now, in military terms, mutiny is a treasonable offense. You can be hanged for it, right? So the captain said, no, that kid that came on board recently. By the way, the captain himself didn't like Claggart. He was a bad guy. So he said, you stand here. And he asked somebody to go bring Billy. So Billy runs up. The captain looks at the master sergeant and told him, can you just tell Billy what you told me? So he turns around, looks Billy straight in the face and said, didn't I hear you last night inciting the other crew members to mutiny on this ship? So anyway, he turns, looks at Billy and says, didn't I hear you? And Billy was a stammerer. So he tried to open his mouth, no words came out. And then he was so angry, he punched the guy. He fell and he died. Think about it. A naive 17-year-old kid ends up on the ship, has done nothing to anybody, naive as they come, provoked to anger, he punches somebody and kills the person. So anger management, right? It is critical that you manage your emotions, and you can start practicing it here. So how you react, it's important. You have to be environmentally conscious, not the sustainability type, but when you're around human beings, how are you self-aware? There was actually a study at Stanford many years ago, and they asked, what is the most important attribute of a leader? And it was self-awareness. Self-awareness. And what is that? Does anybody know what self-awareness is? You all do it every day. You all do it every day. If you look at the pictures of Mariah Carey, she always gives the best side of her face to the camera. And the other side, she has a little hair on it. She projects her strength. When you walk to the mirror every day, the ladies especially, well, you are putting your best foot forward, right? When you're a man, you should ask yourself how many times somebody comes to whisper to you that your zipper is down in public. Right? And it's an accident. You just forgot that. But that's a self-awareness. You have to be self-conscious. You can't take these things to chance. So self-awareness is not something you can teach. You know, I work with a guy that every day wore a nice tie and a jacket, nice jacket, and he was known for that. His brand, his personal brand, his personal signature. So you have to ask yourself, what is mine? When you wake up in the morning, before you go into the window, into the mirror, and make sure that you clean yourself up, clean your nose up, or people say, hey, something is hanging out of your nose. These are all crude examples of self-awareness. And the only way you can remember them is for me to be this crude, right? You can't walk around with one shirt button halfway. Now, if your pant is sagging, please pull it up. There are no faces in life. You just have to prepare for the right face, to go out there and make an impact, to build a life for yourself. That's the only phase that I know. So anyway, let's come back to Billy, because there's an interesting turn of events. In anger, he reacted. He killed somebody. So a jury was set up to try him. And you can't forget the fact that this is a military vehicle, right? It's a military vehicle at sea. And it's wartime. I think it's 1812 or 1814. So after a few days of deliberation, Billy was discharged as not being guilty. What? Not guilty? For killing a senior military officer on a military vehicle at a time of war? So the captain assembled the jurors and said, what went into your thinking? What went into the deliberation that exonerated Billy? One of them said, oh, come on, Captain. You know we all hate Claggart. He was such a bad guy. Billy just did what we did not have the courage to do. So start thinking about this, because we'll come to the theme, the conscience versus the law. So in their conscience, everybody on that ship didn't like that guy. He was such a nasty human being. They couldn't care if he was dead or not. They couldn't care if somebody stabbed him in the shadows. They couldn't care if somebody threw him off the ship at night. It's good riddance. But there is law. So the captain said, guys, I want you to go around this ship and count the number of cannons you have on it. And come back and tell me whether this is an act of peace. And in my summary, I deliberately put in a bunch of these quotes. You should go back and read this book. It's a high school book. You should go back and, if you can find the whole book, read it. But he said, let your consciences lie low. Let your consciences lie low. That conscience that tells you that because he's a bad guy, he can be killed by anybody, it's not the law. So what happens? They retried Billy. And he was sentenced to death. And as he mounted that stage to be hanged, you know what his colleagues said? Long live Billy. Such a contradiction, right? He did a dirty job for them, but he died alone. So now let's break this down. Did you think the captain loved Claggart? He didn't. Did he want him dead? Yes. But did he kill him? No. So it tells you that, look, just because you hate somebody doesn't mean you have the right legally to kill them. And in the real world, you come across so many of these people. Consider yourself lucky if you meet one. You could meet two or you could meet three. The first time you encounter them, the blood is bad, and you haven't even said a word. You're dealing with human beings. Even Lucifer was an angel, right? Who was so bad they had to kick him out. So even angels have problems. Yeah? So I like this story because, like I said, that ship to me is like the corporate world. You walk in, and the first guy that shows up and says, "Oh, welcome to Becton and Dickinson. Are you Fred?" Say, "Yeah." "Wow, it's an exciting place to be. I've been here for 15 years. A week later, he comes to you and says, "How are things going?" And you're like, "Wow, the people here are really nice, you know." That guy could be just a mole. Facts. I can tell you plenty of stories like that. Every organization has the princess of the organization. And they have their claggards, and they have their billies, and you live with them every single day. And you see the princes and the princesses, they get promoted whether they are performing or not. And then you find the billies that run around and do the hatchet man's job. They add no value to the organization, and yet they draw pay. And if you were in my faculty meeting this week, I had a faculty member that was complaining. And that's something you should never do where you work. Nobody hires you to come and complain and whine. Facts. Did you hear that? Don't be naive. And nobody hires you to come and whine. Your career is dead on arrival, no matter how brilliant you are. I'm just telling you guys today that intelligence is oversold. There's many more things that will make you successful. Intelligence is just one of them. Intelligence opened the door for you to enter into that jungle. But you need to learn the rules of that jungle to survive in it. So, conscience and justice. So when I first read this book, I'm thinking, how come the justice system in this country doesn't work? It is clear cut, right? Billy lived with them, ate with them, but when he committed a crime, he got killed. Now, you have to be careful. There's a fine line between being savvy and being a bootlicker. You know what a bootlicker is, right? In some places they say ass lickers. That's the one that most people know. But a bootlicker is the guy that sucks up to authority. Now, you could lose your respect also doing that. But if you do it the way that I did it, a sense of professionalism around your duties, if you ask your boss, is there anything that I can help you with? Has nothing to do with bootlicking, right? It has everything to do with your enthusiasm to make him successful. And you realize that most of the people that you work with, you're way smarter than them. And there's a reason they hire you as a compliment. So if you go around the company saying, my boss is the dumbest guy ever, you should know that's the only reason why you have a job. Right? If he could do everything, why will he hire you? So you always have to understand that there's a strategic partnership. Strategic partnership. And so in dealing with Todd Podvinsky, who was my boss at that time, my relationship with him was a strategic partnership. Now, when he realized that I can deliver so that he can deliver, and in the process, he gets successful, what do you think he will do in my case? He will bring you along because he needs you to continue to stay successful. So that is being organizationally savvy. How many of you ever heard that word till today? Or those words, organizational savviness? You've heard it before, right? You've heard it before. It's basically how you walk through that minefield. And in other words, how do you get what you want on your own terms without anybody else around you feeling like they lost? Let me repeat that for clarity. How do you get what you want? I didn't say what you deserve. I didn't say what you deserve. You have to be careful with that. Because you actually realize in life that most of the things you get, you don't really deserve them. Seriously. Seriously. I mean, if you are born rich and you wake up and you take over as CEO of your father's company, what did you work? How hard did you work to get there? Right? It's a birthright. It's not an accomplishment. And then we all know that there are a lot of people that work so hard all their lives and nothing ever happens for them. So what does that mean? You shouldn't work hard. You need to work smart. You need to work smart, and being savvy is one way of working smart. Okay, so don't become Billy. That's the theme for this class. Learn a lot and read what the captain said. All those quotations, memorize them. Questions? Yes, sir.
I'd like to know whether the captain took the right action.
Mm-hmm.
Because the sergeant has come to report to you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you are calling media that has done it.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't he have done something?
Brilliant question. So Clark goes to report Billy, and instantly, there's no investigation. The investigation was instantaneous, right? Like, go get Billy, let's find out what's going on. Could he have done it differently? Anybody wants to attempt that before I attempt an answer? So I think the first thing is that it's a book, right? So the jury, the time period in books are really, really short. But I think there was an underlying problem. So the prevailing environment on that ship was that nobody liked the guy. So maybe the captain didn't trust him. He didn't trust that he was telling him the truth. He didn't trust that that naive kid called Billy could even contemplate that. So he probably said, come on, how can that be true? Go bring that kid. Now, if he had heard Billy's side of the story, if Billy were able to articulate whether that was true or not, then I think that is when the investigation measures could have gone into place. Yes, sir.
Having mentioned world leaders or leaders, the question comes to mind. It's like you wonder whether when they get there, then they change. Because the people who you have lived with have been good people, or they are good people, and then you put them there. And then all of a sudden, it's like they are not doing the right thing. They are doing the things the old people or the people who have been there already are doing.
Yeah.
It's a system which has changed them, or they changed, or they can't, their hands are tied. What happens, and how do you navigate that?
So I think I need to do this program for some senior government people too, ministers and stuff like that. So there was a study many years ago in New York that showed that when police officers wear their uniforms and they have their police badge, they become superhuman. And that somehow it's a mental thing that says, now I have power. I mean, remember, police can arrest you in the United States for any reason. He has the power to do that. And when you watch the arresting process, it is just this sheer feeling of power that I can do this to you and nothing will happen. Even if I'm wrong, you only get released, but nothing will happen to me because I have authority. The state has vested in me an authority reflected in my uniform and in my badge. Respect me. I can be dangerous. So part of it is psychological. I want to believe that the people that we see get into power and start behaving that the way that they do is that was them. They didn't just have a platform to exhibit that character for us. And they begin to manifest who they are when you give them the stage. That's one postulate. I could be wrong. You guys could have different ideas. I think the second is that they underestimate the responsibilities that they fought for. They underestimate. The president of Ghana today underestimates what he signed up for when he said there was money everywhere and yet we were suffering. And then he gets stuck in a road in Volta region. And everywhere you turn to in Ghana today, every community is looking for roads. Right? It's like, where is the money going to come from? But if you had gone to run an election and say, we have no money to build roads, every community has to step up and do community labor to build their roads, just like the Europeans did 400-500 years ago, you wouldn't get elected. So part of it is us. These guys came from us. They didn't come from us. I have friends who are politicians. And I always suspected they were bad guys. And now I can confirm that they really are. Because they don't even pick calls from their own siblings.
And so I was asking,
Yeah.
where individuals went to know information, right? So let's say your mates and yourself have discussed something, then you feel like the higher authority should know. But then you don't want to betray the confidence of your mates as well.
When is snitching appropriate? That's a difficult question. No. So, there was supposedly a coup attempt in Ghana not too long ago. And everybody that is being arrested now happened to have been part of a WhatsApp group that were discussing how Ghana needed to progress. There were police officers, there were soldiers, people were contributing to the WhatsApp group. And the guys that actually started the WhatsApp group were the ones that were arrested for plotting the coup. And everybody else on that WhatsApp group is being arrested now. So think about that. You have to be careful what kind of organizations you join. I have been on a few WhatsApp groups. There was one called Close That Chamber. And the plan was to march and prevent the parliamentarians from building another chamber when kids cannot even find places to sit in schools. So I joined for a course. And when the parliamentarians decided that they were no longer going to build, I told them there was no more need to march. But then I realized that most of the people that said we should proceed with the march were not even residents in Ghana. That's another thing you have to be cautious about. So anytime somebody was vocal about the march, I did a Google search on them, I did a Facebook search on them, and realized that one was in a graduate school somewhere in Ohio. So who is going to go march and get shot at your insistence when you are not there? So eventually, I prevailed on them not to march. And my last posting said, you should listen to a words of wisdom from somebody who is a little older. Although I know dumb people grow old also. But take this from me. So anyway, the march didn't happen. And a few days later, I made up my decision to step out of the WhatsApp group because most of the stuff they were discussing now had nothing to do with the original intent for which I had joined the group. So the long and short story is that, look, anytime you are in a group and people are planning something that is illegal, you have to ask yourself whether you want to be a part of this or not. You also have to figure out, if you are in a group, what is really the objective of the group? When people start deviating from that objective, you have to be cautious. And it's not every friend that you make that will last forever. Some friends are temporary. Those are what we call strategic interests. And when those interests are no longer there, people move on. I think for me, that was the biggest shock I had in America. First semester, helping a lot of students with calculus. Every moment they were in my dorm looking for help. The next semester, when we were not taking any classes, they walk past you with their backpacks and as if they've never seen you before. And coming from where I come from, I thought they were my friends, right? We're hanging out, we're eating lunch, what else? But they were not. All right, so I've been promising you that for this particular discussion on the conscience, justice, and the law, I'm going to need a lawyer to come. So we've been having these different teams every week. So if it's moral authority, we bring somebody, a clergy. If we can't find one, we bring an elder citizen to talk about, in their opinion, why should a leader have moral authority. So without further ado, my good friend here, Kweku, is a prominent lawyer in Ghana. I told you, he's shaking his head. He's a humble man. He's worked at Okomfo-Anokye Chambers, where he started his career, worked at Sore at law. So when Sore said he couldn't come here, I said, can you give me somebody equally formidable? And he said, Kweku will come and do this job for you. So we're your audience, eh? The floor is yours.
My understanding is that we need to discuss today the interrelationship between conscience, justice, and the law. This is not supposed to be a lecture. This is supposed to be an interactive session. So I did not prepare any lecture note, and I don't intend to lecture. We would have a discussion, agree on the things that we can, disagree on those that we can. I'll run away from here, and after that, you face your lecture. Okay. So I thought that to begin this interactive session, we should try to understand what the meanings of those three very technical words are. And I'm sure that most of you would have what, in your opinions, are the meanings of these words. So if we could start with conscience. What do we think is conscience?
So I think conscience is a little voice that speaks to your mind about what is wrong or what you should do and every decision you take.
Okay.
So I think conscience is a sense of morality and the ability to decipher right and wrong, what's right and wrong.
Okay.
And for me, conscience is using your own discretion to debate on a subject matter based on how you feel it should be handled.
The internal. Okay. Well, two of the answers that struck me is one from the last speaker and from Gideon. Because you see, and this is my opinion, conscience ought to be subjective. What is right to you may not necessarily be right to me. But what is right to you and which makes you comfortable to act is the definition of what your conscience is. So it doesn't matter that the other person sees it to be wrong or right. If you feel comfortable by your own opinion that it is right so to do, that is your conscience. Right. Now let's move on to justice. What's your opinion on justice? And mind you, we're focusing on what our opinions are, not what the definition is. You know? So what is your opinion of what justice is?
I think that justice only happens if you all suffer the same consequences for the same wrong.
Thank you very much. Do we have any opinions? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Harriet, and I think
Harriet.
Harriet. Harriet.
Okay.
I think justice is enforcing the law, and I believe the phrase "nobody is above the law" should really take into consideration when enforcing the law.
Okay.
So I think law pertaining to us, humanity, something the universe has, but we didn't know. But as we go on, the knowledge we obtain from the universe tries to tell
That is
us.
solid. That is solid. That is solid. And we're going to end there on the law. And I try to see the relationship between conscience, law, and justice, but that was solid. You see, we have gone through conscience, justice, and the law. And I'm sure that no matter how split the class will be at the end of this interactive section, you would agree, nonetheless, that there is a line that runs through these three concepts. Now, what do you think is the relationship between conscience and justice? Or let's take it the other way around. What do you think is the relationship between conscience and the law? Yes, sir.
Whether something is going on back.
Okay. Now let's go back to our discussion on conscience. I think that by the time we're done with what our opinions were on conscience, we agree that it is very subjective. So it is what the person thinks is right? And I think that we agree that what may be right for me would not necessarily be right for you, right? Now, because everybody is deemed to have a subjective perspective of what conscience is, and human beings would generally have to interact, we have to find a way for that interaction to leverage. Because if I have to deal with you, and what I think is right is different from what you think is right, there's always going to be conflict. So as humans evolved and our interactions evolved and society grew, we needed to find a way to get our conscience to sync. And so you realize that even though the laws we have, by your definition, not by my definition, by your general definition, are supposed to be rules or standards or ethics or regulations that are given out to guide the relationships of people, either by a group of people, by a sovereign entity, but that these people would look at it and acknowledge it as that which guide their interpersonal relationships. It had to sit within the context of the general conscience of the people. So because you need to deal with the other person, and in dealing with the other person, you are subjected to your conscience, but that your conscience may not necessarily be in tandem with the conscience of the other person, we needed to find a middle way. That is law. Then we come back to the middle point to determine what is just, or what justice is. Now, when your conscience has evolved for you what the law is, people need to understand what the standard of the law is, so they can appreciate whether or not the law is properly served. That is justice. So justice is merely the standard of the law that has been given to you out of the generality of conscience. Do we agree? I am just basically summarizing for you what it is that you've said this past 15, 20 minutes. So, having said this, we'll move on to deal with the real issue. And as Prof says, the real issue is that we believe within the context of our African society, conscience plays a lot of role in how the law is served. Is that the case? How do we make out that case? Why do we think that the law is interfered with by our conscience, which is informed most often by our culture?
I think the building blocks of our society from the beginning have been our customs and traditions. So at a point we want to evolve and we've set up a law. So we've gotten used to something which we've done for say 50 years, and as humans we've set up something as a law. And how do we all of a sudden say, let's change and accept that? So I think sometimes, because of what we've gotten so used to, that law which we have set up becomes a stumbling block sometimes, and we want to get not comfortable with it when it catches up with us.
Interpretation of the law is mostly very subjective. There are objective pathways to interpret the law, but because you have someone who is primarily guided by his conscience, trying to interpret the law, even at the highest level applicable, in terms of Ghana, say the Supreme Court, a judge can only interpret the law on the basis of what his subjective thinking is, even though he employs objective processes in doing that.
So I think that would be human behavior.
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
So the days of technology, as we're evolving, in your personal opinion, should we go into it where we're getting machines to be a bit more objective, since that can do away with the subjective human behavior?
Let me tell you something. You see, the biggest problem we make as Africans is to think that we need to follow the West. That is our biggest problem. As far as I'm concerned, the basis of most of our problems is because we feel that we need to follow the West. Now, I may be wrong, but you are driving at AI, artificial intelligence, which is based on human programming, born out of a subjective mind, controlled by a conscience. We go back to square one. Because that machine, that computer, that artificial intelligence is programmed by a subjective person who has conscience. It can never transcend beyond what the depth of knowledge, thinking, and understanding of that human being is. Yes, sir.
So let's say for the human conscience, I believe that it will be influenced by the emotions of the person, all the other human physical factors surrounding the person at that instant during the decision, right?
Yes.
So now, but then for a machine, that's like things that would rarely happen at that instant, but then you have the same knowledge base as the human being.
But his argument is that the machine will be previously programmed by a human with all its flaws. And I think what Barnabas is saying is that if you're looking for precedent, the computer has the power of deploying to you in a summarized one sheet,
Yes.
2 million other events and what judgment was made.
One thing we have to bear in mind is that the law is dynamic. In everything he said, I realized that everybody actually had that in mind because they kept making reference to time and how subjective it was. Now, if we look at certain very important things or areas of law, for example, matrimonial law, the there was a point in time when there was this principle that a woman have to show that she has had substantial contribution, she has contributed substantially to the property that they have acquired as a couple for it to be entitled to 50%. Now, there's also another school of thought that would say that as an individual, despite the fact that you are married, you are all entitled to acquire individual property as your right. Now, if you are going to use artificial intelligence and you are going to feed in old precedents related to past events, not considering new events, the dynamic nature of time and human beings ourselves, then you are going to fail.
Do we realize that in all of this, culture plays a very big role? And you see, culture would, under this circumstance, be the collective interplay of what our conscience is, what our notion of justice is, and the set of laws that are applicable to us by virtue of that. Because you see, the individual has a conscience. Now, society grows by reproduction. So your conscience will be shaped by that of your parents. Naturally, there may be variations, but there would definitely be similarities between what your notion of conscience is and that of your siblings, of your parents, and your immediate family members, because they raise you, and they raise you in a particular fashion. So if you get into any unit in society, you realize that what the notion of conscience is revolves within certain circles, which is why it is so easy for us to accept polygamy and to detest homosexuality. And when you move into another society, it is so easy for them to accept homosexuality and yet detest polygamy. Now, I said something to you that our biggest problem as Africans is to think that we need to follow the West. We have a society with an inherent culture. Then out of the blue, something happened to us. Colonization. And somebody decided that in order to control us, they needed to supplant in our system and our culture what has evolved in theirs. We can keep our culture, we can keep our conscience, we can even keep our notion of what justice is, but we need to follow their law. That is the problem. I don't know if you follow. So, we live in a society where somebody would have to put another in a palanquin and carry him on his shoulders for as long as the person wishes. That is our culture. We live in a society where the elder cannot be wrong. That is our culture. We live in a society where we believe in class. So, within the context of an African society, the elite class is a royal class who don't supposedly do any wrong. Now, get into the English aristocratic society. They say the Queen or the King of England can travel anywhere in the world without a passport. How does that sit in international law and diplomacy? But it's acceptable. We see nothing wrong with it. I'm an Ashanti. In Kumasi today, the Asantehene just has to get up and say, close your shops. In fact, he did it less than 2 years ago. 11 days. I'm organizing my mother's funeral. No shop opens. People have paid their property taxes. They have paid their general taxes. They have their wares in their shops. The streets were not built by him, but they obeyed him.
So the problems that we find with accommodating what is Western law supplanted in our culture now is what is evolving what we see to be deviation from following what the law is. Because if you look at the law in the context of our culture, what would otherwise appear to be an interference in our law, really, is a simple manifestation of what our cultural values are. When people go wrong in our culture and they are from a particular class, they get people to speak on their behalf. And automatically, the law is suspended. That is our culture. And before the West came into our life, there was nothing wrong with it. There were people to whom the law did not apply. If you measure it against that which is in the West, it may appear unjust. It may appear irregular. It may appear a deviation of the law. But go back 100 years and create that scenario and ask yourself whether or not it is proper, just, or right. So your argument with time, your argument with context, your argument with relevant society is very important in this discussion. I think that we have managed to understand what the context of these discussions are. I'll be happy if we can find another period to now discuss what the problem is. Thank you very much.